Hi everyone and welcome back to another video. Today I have a top 10 tips on how to keep your plants during winter, I suppose, especially in the Northern Hemisphere. I hear what you're saying. It is, yes, already February and I am late to the party. I don't know why I didn't do this at the beginning of winter. I don't know. But hopefully this will still be useful in years to come, so people can come back to this video because these tips are not exclusive to one single winter. So and particularly in the UK at the moment, I don't know about you, whoever you are, wherever you are watching this from, but we currently have snow, so we are kind of going through even more of a winter right now than we have been previously. If you hear any scrambling in the background, it is the cats. And it seems like the whole household has just woken up. It's just getting crazy. I'm on my third attempt at doing this video because my focus is elsewhere. So I just want to go straight into it because I'm going to end up waffling as usual. But just so you know, I am struggling a little bit for video ideas at the moment. So if you have any ideas, please let me know in the comments what you would like to see, because I am always open to suggestions and also a little bit open to challenges. So if you got a challenge, then let me know. I might do it. So yeah, on to the overwintering houseplants. Number one, fairly obvious one, is get a grow light or get several grow lights. I have a number of grow lights around the house. I am planning on doing a grow light video at some stage. I really want to get that done, but it takes a little bit of time just to kind of collate all the information. So I will be doing that at some stage, hopefully in the near future, maybe even next week, we'll find out. But a grow light is really important for keeping your plants going over winter, because obviously in the Northern Hemisphere at least we get a lot less daylight. For some more northern parts of the world, it's up to like as little as, I don't know why that was hard to say, as little as like 5 hours a day of daylight, which is not ideal for a plant. Particularly not a tropical plant or a cactus or any plant that requires any level of high light or even medium light. So I think a grow light is really important. There are a lot of options that you can go for, but make sure at a minimum that you are going for 6,000 Kelvin. Okay, so you want your Kelvin number to be higher than 6,000 or 6,000 at a minimum. So that is essentially daylight. So anything less is not, will still help, but it's not your optimum. So you want to go for 6,000, absolute minimum. But yeah, I will go into more about grow lights in the future, but just so you know, it is important for overwintering your plant because plants require light to photosynthesize, to create energy. I think not having a large amount of daylight is not going to kill your plant on its own, but if it is in combination with a few other issues, for example, overwatering because it's not able to photosynthesize as much, the roots might rot, which in turn might kill the plant. So, you know, it becomes part of a collection of issues that can actually kill the plant. So having a grow light really kind of helps to prevent issues in the long run over winter. Next on the list is use propagation boxes for humidity. During the winter, a lot of us will be putting on our central heating. For a lot of people, this is a well-known thing, but if you haven't heard it before, central heating does dry out your air, which is why we all get a little bit more chesty and our skin dries out and all sorts of things, and the same happens to our plants. We end up with crispy leaves, we end up with unhappy plants, so it is actually quite important, especially for more tropical types of plants, that you keep that humidity up. For cacti and succulents, not so much. I would say not at all. Really avoid any humidity for those plants. But if you have any tropical plants, definitely consider putting them in a propagation box. All you need to do is get a clear plastic box, like a storage box from like Wilko's or Tesco or B&Q or wherever sells them, and just plonk your plants in that. It needs to be clear so it can still get light, but that also will help to keep the temperature in, and increases the humidity because the air is trapped and it's not being dried out by the central heating. You can also use like a glass cloche, or you could use an upside down vase, or you can use a repurposed fish tank, a terrarium, vivarium, etc. Anything that kind of keeps that humidity up. You just do need to be a bit careful about making sure that you have airflow. This is something that I quite like to use. It's a propagator. It's actually for seeds more than anything, but you've got the tray underneath, so you can just plonk your plants in that. It's got the lid on the top, so it's clear. You can get your light into your plants. Can't say that. Quite nice and easily. It's got a couple of air vents on the top as well to help maintain your airflow. So that's really handy. Propagation box, also really handy. I will leave a link to my video on how to set one of those up just there. Next on the list is get a hygrometer. So kind of following on from the humidity thing, you can get hygrometers, which usually will tell you temperature and humidity of the environment that plant is in. I've got a couple of different types. I've got one that tells you a historical high and low, as well as the current temperature and current humidity. Might be useful to you. I personally don't find that particularly helpful. It's interesting, but not particularly helpful. I think they're about like £6 on Amazon, or you can get these little fellas. You can get about 3 of these for £6 or £8 or something from Amazon, and all it does is it shows you the humidity percentage and the temperature up there, so you can pop this wherever your plant is that you want to know what the humidity / temperature is. Pop it like right next to it or something, so you get a good idea of it. Just be careful not to put it on the soil, because that will kind of skew your readings, particularly if it's quite moist. But yeah, these are actually really handy, really cheap, and they're not super precise, so I wouldn't use them like in a scientific experiment kind of situation, but in order to keep your plants going, they are pretty good and handy to have a good view around. So yeah, you can use that information to obviously see if your plant is too low in humidity. Is that how you say it? Yeah, I think so. Or the humidity around your plant is too low, then you know that you perhaps need to do something to change that environment. Some people like to use humidifiers. I personally am not a huge fan. I feel like it's not a great idea structurally for your home to be raising the humidity too much, particularly if you have a home that is prone to black mold or any kind of issues like that. I don't know, just for me personally, I don't like the idea of doing that inside your home. I'd rather keep my plants like inside a cabinet and do that, but it's up to you. Some people like to use it. Next, I have got sorry, I keep looking down. I've got my little book here just to make sure I keep my list. Next is try to keep your temperature consistent. Now this will be easier if you've got a thermostat at home. You might not have a thermostat at home, but if you do, then great. Or if you have smart controls or whatever, but ideally you don't want to be fluctuating in temperatures from like really cold and then turning the heating on, so it becomes really warm. That all kind of puts stress on your plants. So ideally you want to keep your temperature as constant as possible, and you probably want to have a look. I mean, I can say, like, I wouldn't like my home to be less than 18 degrees for the sake of my plants, because a lot of them kind of 15 degrees is a real minimum. Some of them are much more tolerant, but a lot of the tropical plants don't like to be colder than 15 degrees. But it really depends on what plants you're keeping. So I would highly recommend doing some research on each of your plants and finding out what your minimum viable temperature is for your collection, and maybe like adding at least a degree or two on top of that so that you've got a bit of wiggle room. For me, I think 18 degrees is kind of a minimum for my plants, based on what I currently own. But yeah, so try and keep your temperature consistent. Try not to let it fluctuate too much. So if you can keep your heating on at a certain temperature, that would be ideal. Obviously, like, the home environment is not the ideal place for a plant. It would be ideal if we could all have temperature controlled greenhouses with humidity and humidifiers. In that case would be lovely, but it's not necessarily feasible for all of us, for most of us, I don't think. So yeah, this is, you know, just some kind of tips for inside the home. Next, point number 5, we've got pull back on your watering. Get to know your plant's requirements. You will find that the watering requirements for your plants is very different in winter than it is in the summer. Some will surprise you and still need more than you think they would, and some will surprise you in the opposite way and not need any water and be saturated for like a month. So you really need to do it on an individual basis. Do not, I repeat, do not do like weekly waterings. Only water your plants when they need it. If you don't already have one, I highly suggest getting yourself a moisture probe. They are fairly cheap on Amazon. Don't pay more than like £6. But all you need to do is poke it into the soil of the plant, and it will tell you whether it is dry, moist, or wet. And in the winter, you kind of want to err more on the dry side of things, and you certainly do not want to be on the high end of moist really in the winter, because your plants need much less water because they don't have as much light, and therefore they're not photosynthesizing as much, so they don't consume as much water, and therefore the water stays in the soil and increases your chances of root rot, basically, on a very, very basic level. So yeah, pull back on your watering, get to know each of your plants. You can use like your finger to test just by poking into the soil and see whether it's moist or not, but I think moist to me might not be the same as moist to you, and vice versa. And I think really the best way, until you know your plant well enough, is to use a moisture meter. I really, really cannot recommend that enough. Reduce fertilizing. So this again does depend on your plants. I mean, I feel like I should put a wraparound piece of advice on all of this and just say, you know, honestly, spend some time getting to know what your plants need, what your plants need, not what all plants need, what your plants at home, what they need. It's so worth it, because if you get the care wrong, you can end up losing your plant. It's not worth that. And you know, my advice might not necessarily be useful. Say if you're applying all of these things to a cactus, you certainly do not want to be increasing the humidity of a cactus, for example. So make sure you do your research. Reduce fertilizing. There are some plants that do like to be fertilized throughout the growing year. But there are certainly some plants that you do not want to be fertilizing over the winter, particularly cacti and succulents. And there are a lot of more sensitive plants that just need that rest period in order to flourish the next year. Things like orchids, I mean, orchid fertilization is a whole other topic, but orchids, they need that rest period in order for them to grow back their flowers, for example. So yeah, reduce your fertilizing. If you were fertilizing once a week in the summer, reduce it to once a month. If you are fertilizing once a month in the summer, maybe give it a rest over the winter period. Get to know your plant. You know, you will find resources online or in books, etc., for how much your plant likes to be fertilized. Point number 7. This one is probably an obvious one and hopefully one that a lot of people know already, but I would generally say try to avoid buying plants online to be shipped during the winter. It is just too cold for a lot of plants. Don't get me wrong, there are some plants that will do just fine in, -0 temperatures, but there are a lot of plants that just won't survive that, and it's not worth the stress. I know there are a lot of sellers that use heat packs now. I am still not sure how I feel about that. I generally just kind of try and tail off my purchasing over the winter, which I feel a bit bad for, because there are obviously some independent plant shops that do need the support over winter. But you could always buy a gift card during the winter to support them and then kind of redeem that in the spring. Certainly I personally wouldn't go buying any rare plants, any extremely expensive plants. I just think it's too much of a risk if that plant dies due to transit shock from being too cold or for being in the dark too long or whatever it is. I think, it's a risk anyway. You don't want to be buying in the height of summer when it's super, super hot and they're going to die of heat stress. You also don't want to be buying in the height of winter or the low of winter. I don't know. Is that the way you say it? But either way, because it can die of cold shock. So yeah, that buying online in a very cold period can outright kill your plant. If it's been shipped in the cold. In the same vein, I wouldn't swap in the cold. I'm not saying don't buy plants. I'm saying don't ship plants in the winter, or certainly not when the temperature is very cold. Keep an eye on the temperatures. Number 8, you can get a heat mat for your plants, particularly for baby plants. I think that's really helpful. I have my baby Hoya cuttings all on a heat mat in my IKEA greenhouse cabinet, because that helps to encourage root growth and the growth of the plant by being warm. Obviously, plants don't like to be too cold. If you have if you're an overwaterer, if you really saturate your soil, then there is nowhere for that to go. If it's cold, it's just going to sit there in the soil. Whereas at least if you are an overwaterer and you have your plants on a heat mat, chances are if it's been overwatered, the water will kind of evaporate out of the soil and increase the humidity. So it's a win-win. But yeah, your plants will definitely benefit from having that extra warmth, particularly if you can't afford heating, or you can't afford to keep your heating on all the time in order to kind of keep a consistent temperature. Heat mat is a really good and quite cheap way of doing things, as long as you get an energy efficient one. Tip number 9 is check your plants daily. This might sound a bit dramatic, but I think it's really important just to have a once over of your plants every single day, because it only takes 24 hours for a plant to decline enough that it's not going to come back, or it's going to take a long time for it to come back. So I think it's really important to keep an eye on what's going on with your plants. Give them a check as much as possible, sometimes twice a day. Personally, I think you should be really looking at your plants at least once a day anyway, because I think that way you can keep on top of what's going on with them. But yeah, certainly in the winter, I think checking them regularly is really important, so that you can kind of do your emergency care if needed. And finally, this is a bit of a controversial one. If your plant needs repotting, repot it. I know a lot of people say that you shouldn't repot in the winter, you should only repot in the growing season. I would beg to differ. If you buy a plant and it's in really crap substrate and it's going to rot the roots, then you definitely need to repot it. If your plant has completely outgrown the pot and every time you water it, it's wilting within a couple of days, it needs to be repotted. And by not repotting it, you are potentially causing it more stress. I think, if you're newer to plants, then maybe avoid repotting in the winter, just because there is a little bit of kind of care and attention needed in terms of knowing what to look for with your plant being stressed, or if you're going to freak out if it loses a leaf or two from the shock of being repotted, then probably don't do it. But if you know, I feel like if you know your plant well enough and you know when it's actually struggling versus when it's just got a little bit of a hissy fit going on, then you're probably fine to repot. And I really think that the advice to not repot sometimes has been taken a little bit too far, and people say, I'm not going to repot in the winter because it's winter, even though my plant is clearly dying of root rot. Like, it doesn't make sense. So I've never had an issue with repotting a plant in the winter. I just do it when they need it, truth be told. Even when I didn't know shit about plants, I repotted in the winter because I didn't know that you weren't supposed to. So I've never had an issue, so I would say carry on. That brings me to the end of my top 10 tips. I would love to know in the comments if you disagree with any of those. Please go ahead. It's, you know, healthy to have a discussion about these things, not just have a dictatorship. Not that I don't think I could ever be a dictator, but maybe I could. I don't know. What do you think, guys? Sorry I keep faffing with my hair. I keep cutting it and it's not doing what I want it to do. Basically, I want it long. I got very distracted there. Never mind. No one needs to know about my hair. Yeah, so what was I saying? Yeah, if you disagree, then please let me know in the comments, because yeah, as I said, I think it's really healthy to have a discussion about it, and maybe I can learn something from you or vice versa. Like, I just don't think that it's a one-way conversation. I think what works for me might not work for you based on your conditions and vice versa. So I think it's good. I think it's good. What I love most about the plant hobby is that you are always learning. Every day is a school day. There is no way that you can know everything about plants. There just isn't. There is not. Okay. Final like bonus tip: if your plant dies, it's not the end of the world, guys. Okay, you will be able to replace your plant. I mean, unless you've got like a philodendron Iolmanii. Is that how you say it? I don't know how you say it. Or a Spiritus Sancti or something like that. You know, obviously freak out if you killed them. That's fine. You have your freak out. Do it. But for the most part, you will always be able to recover a new version of your plant. So just kind of, if you lose a plant, chalk it up to experience. Try and have a think about what went wrong with it and use that to inform your future care. But yeah, just don't panic. And if you do have a crisis, Google it. If you have a crisis, ask your plant friends, or have a look in your plant books, etc., etc. There is an absolute wealth of resources available to you if you have a plant crisis. So try not to panic. Things will be okay. We'll get through the winter. Okay, this is, can you tell I'm just not here this week. I'm just not here. But hopefully I'll be back on the ball for next week. Please do give me some ideas for what videos to make, because I've hit a kind of wall, and I just kind of feel like I don't know what people want to see, and I do, but I don't, if that makes any sense. So yeah, some inspiration would be great. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for putting up with me in a bit of a chaotic mood. And I hope you have a lovely week, and I will see you again next time. Bye, guys.